black pastor left a note before disappearing. 25 years later, the choir finds something. The rain drummed against the windshield of Marcus Thompson's rental car as he pulled into the gravel parking lot of Mount Olive Baptist Church. 25 years had passed since he'd last seen this place, yet the red brick building looked exactly as he remembered, weathered but dignified, standing like a sentinel against the gray October sky of rural Alabama. Marcus sat in his car for a long moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, watching water cascade down the windows. At 43, he was a successful investigative journalist for the Chicago Tribune, known for his relentless pursuit of truth and his ability to uncover corruption in the highest places. But sitting here, in the shadow of his childhood church, he felt like that confused 17-year-old boy again, the one who had lost his faith the night Pastor Samuel Washington disappeared. The call from his cousin Deshaun had come 3 weeks ago. "Marcus, you need to come home. The choir was cleaning out the old organ loft yesterday and they found something. Something about Pastor Samuel Washington." Even now, saying the name in his mind sent a familiar ache through Marcus's chest. The man who had been like a father to him after his own dad died. The man who had vanished without a trace on a cold February night in 1999, leaving behind only a hastily scrawled note that read, "I cannot bear the weight of what I know. May God forgive me. S.W." The official story had been suicide. The police, led by Sheriff Bobby Hutchins, had concluded that Pastor Washington had driven to Miller's Pond and drowned himself. No body was ever found, but the note seemed clear enough. Case closed. The church grieved, the community moved on, and Marcus Thompson lost his faith in God, justice, and the goodness of people. Now, stepping out of his car into the October drizzle, Marcus felt the familiar weight of skepticism that had served him well in his career. He'd agreed to come back, not because he believed there was any new truth to uncover, but because Deshaun was family, and family meant something, even when faith didn't. The church doors opened before he could knock, and Deshaun emerged with that same wide grin that had gotten them into trouble as kids. He was bigger now, his hair touched with gray, wearing the collar of an associate pastor. The sight of it made Marcus wince slightly. "Cuz." Deshaun's embrace was warm and genuine. "Man, it's good to see you. I know this ain't easy, coming back here." "It's just another story, D," Marcus replied, though they both knew it wasn't true. "Tell me what you found." Deshaun's expression grew serious. "Come on inside. Sister Gladys and the choir are waiting." The sanctuary looked smaller than Marcus remembered, but the familiar smell of old wood and worn hymnals brought back a flood of memories. Sunlight streaming through stained glass windows during Sunday morning services. Pastor Washington's booming voice delivering sermons that could make sinners weep and saints shout. His own young voice joining the youth choir, believing with all his heart that God had a plan. Sister Gladys Williams, now in her 70s, but still sharp as a tack, sat in the front pew with 3 other choir members. She'd been the church pianist for over 40 years and had loved Pastor Washington like a son. When she saw Marcus, her face lit up despite the gravity of the situation. "Marcus Thompson," she said, rising to embrace him. "Look at you, all grown up and successful. Pastor Sam would be so proud." The comment stung more than Marcus let on. "Sister Gladys, Deshaun said you found something?" She nodded, her expression growing solemn. "We were cleaning out the old organ pipes yesterday. Haven't been used since we got the new electric one 5 years ago. Ruby here," she gestured to a woman about her age, "was pulling out some old sheet music when she felt something taped to the inside of one of the pipes." Ruby stepped forward, holding a manila envelope that looked weathered with age. It was wrapped in plastic, sealed tight, had Pastor Sam's handwriting on it. "For Marcus Thompson, when he's ready to know the truth." Marcus felt his blood run cold. His name, on an envelope hidden for 25 years. He took it with hands that barely trembled, years of professional composure overriding the emotional turmoil beneath. "You haven't opened it?" he asked. "Wasn't ours to open," Sister Gladys said simply. "Pastor Sam wanted you to have it. We figured when you were ready, you'd come back for it." Marcus stared at the envelope. His name was written in Pastor Washington's careful script, the same handwriting that had graded his Sunday school papers and signed birthday cards. Whatever was inside had been important enough for the pastor to hide it, to address it specifically to a teenage boy who would one day become a man. "I need some air," Marcus said, his voice rougher than intended. "Take your time, son," Sister Gladys said gently. Truth has a way of waiting for the right moment. Marcus stepped outside into the gray afternoon, the envelope clutched in his hands. 25 years of questions, of doubt, of anger at a God who had let a good man disappear, might be answered by whatever was inside. But did he really want to know? Had he become too comfortable with his cynicism to handle the truth? The rain had stopped, but the air still held the promise of more. Marcus walked to the small cemetery behind the church, where weathered headstones marked generations of Mount Olive's faithful. He found the memorial marker they'd placed for Pastor Washington. Not a grave, since there was no body, but a simple stone that read, Rev. Samuel Washington, 1955 to 1999, beloved pastor and friend. Sitting on a bench near the marker, Marcus finally opened the envelope. Inside were 3 items: a letter written in Pastor Washington's hand, a small cassette tape, and a photograph. Marcus looked at the photo first. It showed Pastor Washington with several men in suits, standing in front of what looked like a construction site. He recognized one of the faces immediately, Richard Hawthorne, who had been the mayor back then and was now a state senator. Another face looked familiar too. Younger, but definitely Bobby Hutchins, the sheriff who had closed the case so quickly. With trembling fingers, Marcus unfolded the letter. It was dated February 10th, 1999, the day before Pastor Washington disappeared. My dear Marcus, it began. If you are reading this, then I am gone, and the truth has finally demanded to be told. I pray that you have grown into the man of integrity I always knew you could be, because what I am about to share will require all of your strength and wisdom. I have discovered something that threatens everything our community believes about itself. For months, I have wrestled with what to do, how to handle knowledge that could destroy lives but cannot be ignored. I have prayed, I have sought counsel, and I have come to understand that sometimes loving people means protecting them from those who would harm them, even when the cost is our own safety. There is money missing from the County Development Fund, money that was supposed to build low-income housing for our people. Instead, it has been stolen by men who smile in our faces on Sunday and rob us blind on Monday. I have proof, Marcus. I have documents, recordings, evidence that could send them to prison where they belong. But they know that I know. Today, Mayor Hawthorne and Sheriff Hutchins came to see me. They made it clear that if I speak out, I will be destroyed. Not just me, the church, the school we've been planning, the community center. They will find ways to crush everything we've built. More than that, they threatened you, son. You and Deshaun and the other young people I love. They know how much you mean to me, and they are not above using that love as a weapon. So, I am leaving. Not because I am weak, not because I cannot bear the weight of what I know, but because sometimes the shepherd must lead the wolves away from the flock. The note I will leave will make them think I have given up, taken my own life in despair. Let them think that. Let them believe they have won. But you, Marcus, when you are old enough, strong enough, wise enough, you will know the truth, and you will decide what to do with it. The tape contains recordings of phone conversations between Hawthorne and his associates. The evidence is hidden where only you would think to look, in the place where we used to practice your reading, where you first told me you wanted to be a writer. You remember, don't you? The place where we talked about truth and justice and the responsibility of those who have been given the gift of words. I am not running away, my son. I am running towards something bigger than myself. Perhaps God has a plan that I cannot see, but I trust that He does, and I trust you to be His instrument of justice when the time is right. Whatever happens to me, know that I love you like my own son. Know that your faith, when it returns, and it will return, will be stronger for having been tested. Know that truth is not always comfortable, but it is always necessary. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. With all my love and faith in you, Pastor Sam. P.S. Trust Detective Maria Santos if she is still on the force. She is one of the good ones, and she never believed the official story. She will help you when you're ready. Marcus read the letter twice, then a third time, each reading making the reality sink in deeper. Pastor Washington hadn't committed suicide. He had been driven away by corrupt officials who had stolen money meant for the community. And somehow he had known that Marcus would one day be in a position to expose the truth. The tape. Marcus looked at the small cassette, remembering the old boombox in Pastor Washington's office. He'd need to find a way to play it, but first, he needed to think about the clue in the letter. The place where they used to practice reading, where Marcus had first talked about becoming a writer. The church basement. There was a small room down there where Pastor Washington had tutored kids after school. Marcus remembered sitting there as a 12-year-old, struggling with a book report, when he'd first told Pastor Sam that he wanted to write stories that would help people understand the truth. The pastor had smiled and said, "Then you'll need to learn to see truth even when it's hidden, son." Marcus stood up, the letter and tape clutched in his hands. The rain was starting again, but he barely noticed. After 25 years, the truth was finally within reach. The question now was whether he had the courage to uncover it completely, and what the cost would be. As he walked back toward the church, he noticed a car parked across the street, a dark sedan with tinted windows. It had been there when he arrived, but he'd been too focused on the church to pay attention. Now, something about it made his reporter's instincts prickle with unease. Deshawn was waiting for him in the sanctuary, along with Sister Gladys and the choir members. They looked at his face and immediately knew that whatever he'd read had changed everything. "What did it say?" Deshawn asked softly. Marcus looked around at these people who had known and loved Pastor Washington, who had mourned his loss for 25 years, who deserved to know the truth. But he also thought about the warning in the letter, about the danger that the truth might bring. "It says that Pastor Sam didn't kill himself," Marcus said finally. "And it says that the real story is going to be a lot more complicated than any of us imagined." Sister Gladys closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you, Jesus. I always knew that man wouldn't take his own life. He had too much faith, too much love for this community." "What are you going to do?" Deshawn asked. Marcus looked at the letter again, at the responsibility Pastor Washington had placed on his shoulders. "I'm going to find out what really happened, and then I'm going to make sure the truth comes out, no matter what it costs." But even as he said the words, he was thinking about that dark sedan across the street, and wondering if the same people who had driven Pastor Washington away 25 years ago were still watching, still waiting, still willing to do whatever it took to keep their secrets buried. The investigation begins. Marcus spent the night at Deshawn's house, in the same bedroom where he'd slept during summers as a child. But sleep wouldn't come. He kept thinking about the letter, about the implications of what Pastor Washington had discovered, and about the dangerous game he was about to enter. The next morning, he drove to the Millbrook Police Department, a small brick building that looked like it hadn't changed much since 1999. The desk sergeant, a young officer who couldn't have been more than 25, looked up as Marcus approached. "I'm looking for Detective Maria Santos," Marcus said. "Is she still on the force?" "Detective Santos?" "Yeah, she's here. She's a lieutenant now, actually. Can I tell her what this is regarding?" "Tell her it's about Pastor Samuel Washington. Tell her Marcus Thompson wants to talk." The young officer's eyebrows rose slightly. "Pastor Washington, that case is pretty old, isn't it?" 25 years, Marcus confirmed. "But some cases never really close." 20 minutes later, a woman in her early 50s emerged from the back of the building. Lieutenant Maria Santos was smaller than Marcus had expected, with graying dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She studied Marcus for a moment before extending her hand. "Mr. Thompson, I remember you. You were just a kid when Pastor Washington disappeared. I heard you became a reporter up in Chicago." "That's right. I'd like to talk to you about the case, if you have time." Santos glanced around the small lobby, then nodded toward a door. "Let's go to my office. This isn't really a conversation for public spaces." Her office was small but organized, with commendations on the walls and case files neatly stacked on her desk. She gestured for Marcus to sit while she closed the door and pulled the blinds. "I'm going to be straight with you, Mr. Thompson," she said, settling behind her desk. "The Pastor Washington case has always bothered me. The official conclusion was suicide, but I never bought it. The man I knew wouldn't have taken his own life, and the evidence was thin." Marcus leaned forward. "What kind of evidence?" "The note, mainly, and the fact that his car was found by Miller's Pond with the keys still in it. But we never found a body, never found any real evidence that he actually entered the water. The whole thing felt rushed to me, like someone wanted it closed quickly." "Someone like Sheriff Hutchins?" Santos's expression grew guarded. "Sheriff Hutchins was my superior at the time. He made the decision to classify it as a probable suicide. I was just a detective then, didn't have much say in how the investigation was handled." Marcus pulled out the letter but hesitated before showing it to her. Pastor Washington had said to trust Detective Santos, but that was 25 years ago. People changed, loyalties shifted. Still, looking at her face, at the genuine concern he saw there, He decided to take the leap. "I found this yesterday," he said, handing her the letter. "It was hidden in the church, left specifically for me." Santos read the letter in silence, her expression growing more serious with each paragraph. When she finished, she looked up at Marcus with something like awe. "Jesus Christ," she whispered. He knew. He knew what was going to happen to him. "You believe it's genuine?" "I know Pastor Sam's handwriting. This is real." She set the letter down carefully, as if it were made of glass. "Mr. Thompson, Marcus, do you understand what this means? If this is true, then we've got corruption that goes all the way to the state level. Richard Hawthorne is a senator now. He's got influence, power, resources. And Bobby Hutchins? Retired as sheriff 5 years ago, but he's still got friends in the department. Still has influence." Santos leaned back in her chair, thinking. The missing development money. I remember that project. It was supposed to build affordable housing in the Riverside neighborhood, where a lot of the black families lived. The money just disappeared. The project never happened. We were told there were budget issues, regulatory problems. But if Pastor Washington had evidence, then someone made sure that evidence disappeared along with him. Santos stood up and walked to her window, looking out at the small town street. "Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Are you prepared for what this might mean? The people involved in this aren't going to just roll over. They've had 25 years to consolidate their power, to bury their secrets deeper." Marcus thought about his comfortable life in Chicago, his successful career, his apartment with its city views and modern conveniences. Then he thought about Pastor Washington, about the man who had sacrificed everything to protect his community and had trusted a 17-year-old boy to eventually set things right. "I'm prepared," he said. "What do we do first?" Santos turned back to him. "First, we listen to that tape. Then we try to find where Pastor Sam hid the rest of the evidence. And then we start digging very, very carefully." They drove to Santos's house, a modest ranch-style home on the outskirts of town. She led Marcus to a small den where she kept her personal files, boxes of old cases that had bothered her over the years, including everything she'd been able to gather on Pastor Washington's disappearance. "I never could let it go," she admitted, pulling out a thick folder. Something about the whole thing just stank. The timing, the pressure to close the case quickly, the way certain people seemed relieved when it was ruled a suicide. She had an old cassette player, one of the few still functional in the digital age. Marcus inserted the tape and pressed play. The sound quality was poor, but they could make out voices clearly enough. The first voice was definitely Richard Hawthorne, though younger than Marcus remembered him. The second voice was harder to identify, but Santos nodded grimly when she heard it. "That's Clayton Morrison," she said. He was the county development director back then. Retired about 10 years ago, moved to Florida. The conversation was damning. Hawthorne and Morrison discussed moving the development money to offshore accounts, using shell companies to hide the transactions. They talked about Pastor Washington as a problem that needed to be handled permanently. "The preacher's getting too close," Hawthorne's voice said on the tape. "He's got documents, says he's going to the state attorney general. We can't let that happen." "What do you want me to do?" Morrison asked. "Whatever it takes. We've got too much invested in this to let some idealistic minister bring it all down. Bobby's on board. He'll make sure any investigation goes the way we want it to." The tape went on for another 10 minutes, detailing how they planned to discredit Pastor Washington, how they would frame his disappearance as a suicide brought on by depression and financial troubles they would fabricate. It was conspiracy to commit murder, pure and simple. When the tape ended, Santos and Marcus sat in silence for a long moment. "This is enough to bring charges," Santos said finally. "This is evidence of conspiracy, fraud, possibly murder. But it's 25 years old," Marcus pointed out. "Will it hold up in court? If we can find the rest of the evidence Pastor Sam mentioned, if we can build a solid case, yes. Murder doesn't have a statute of limitations." Marcus thought about the clue in the letter, the place where they used to practice reading. "I need to get into the church basement, tonight when no one's around. I'll go with you." "Lieutenant, I can't ask you to." "You're not asking. I'm telling you. I've waited 25 years to get justice for Pastor Sam. I'm not backing down now." As they planned their next moves, neither of them noticed the car that had followed Marcus from the police station, or the telephoto lens that captured their meeting through Santos's window. In a small town, secrets were hard to keep, and some people had spent decades making sure that certain truths never came to light. But as Marcus and Santos would soon discover, truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply it's buried. And sometimes, it takes only one person willing to dig to uncover what others have killed to hide. Hidden evidence. The Mount Olive Baptist Church stood empty and dark at 11 o'clock that night, its familiar silhouette barely visible against the cloudy sky. Marcus and Lieutenant Santos parked a block away and walked through the cemetery, using a route that would keep them out of sight from the main road. Deshawn had given Marcus the key to the church, though Marcus hadn't told him exactly why he needed it. Some truths were too dangerous to share until he understood their full scope. The church basement hadn't changed much in 25 years. The same wood-paneled walls, the same folding tables and metal chairs, the same smell of old books and cleaning supplies. Marcus led Santos to the small room in the back corner, the one where Pastor Washington had tutored children after school. He called it his thinking room. Marcus explained as they entered the cramped space, said it was where he came to pray when he needed guidance with difficult problems. The room contained a small desk, 2 chairs, and several bookcases filled with theological texts and children's books. Marcus ran his hands along the shelves, looking for anything that seemed out of place. Santos used her flashlight to examine the walls and floor. "Marcus," she said softly, "look at this." She was kneeling beside the desk. Her light focused on something carved into the wooden leg. It was barely visible, just a few letters scratched into the wood. MT, Psalm 146, 7-9. "That's your initials," Santos said. "And a Bible verse. Do you know what it says?" Marcus nodded, the memory coming back clearly. "Pastor Sam made me memorize it during one of our sessions. The Lord sets prisoners free. The Lord gives sight to the blind. The Lord lifts up those who are bowed down. The Lord loves the righteous. The Lord watches over the foreigner and sustains the fatherless and the widow, but he frustrates the ways of the wicked." "The Lord sets prisoners free," Santos repeated, "and frustrates the ways of the wicked." He was trying to tell you something. Marcus pulled out the desk drawer, but it was empty except for some old pencils and paper clips. Then he remembered. Pastor Washington had always kept his most important books in a small cabinet behind the desk. Marcus moved the desk aside and found the cabinet, its door slightly ajar. Inside were 3 books, a worn copy of the Bible, a book of Psalms, and a collection of Martin Luther King Jr.'s sermons. But tucked inside the Bible was a small key, and taped to the inside cover of the King book was a piece of paper with an address, 1247 Riverside Drive, Apartment 3B. "That's in the Riverside neighborhood," Santos said, the area where the affordable housing was supposed to be built. Marcus examined the key. It was small, like a safety deposit box key, but there was no bank name or number on it. However, taped to the key was a small piece of paper with the number 247, written in Pastor Washington's careful script. "Safety deposit box 247, Santos mused. "But which bank?" "There were only 3 banks in town back then," Marcus said. "First National Community Trust and Millbrook Savings. We'll have to check them all. Not we, me. If this goes public too soon, they'll destroy whatever evidence is left. I need to do this officially through proper channels, or it won't hold up in court." Marcus understood the logic, but the reporter in him chafed at the delay. Still, Santos was right. They needed to do this by the book if they wanted justice instead of just revenge. They were about to leave when Santos grabbed Marcus's arm. "Listen," she whispered. Outside, they could hear the sound of car doors closing, followed by voices. Male voices, trying to be quiet but not quite succeeding. "Sure he's in there?" "Car's been sitting there for 20 minutes. Either he's inside or he walked away, and there's nowhere to walk to around here." Marcus and Santos exchanged glances. They were trapped in the basement with at least 2 people upstairs, people who clearly knew they were there. Santos drew her service weapon and motioned for Marcus to stay back. She moved quietly to the basement stairs and listened. Footsteps were moving around the sanctuary above them, searching. "Check the basement," a voice said. Marcus recognized it. Bobby Hutchins, the former sheriff. If he's looking for something, that's where it would be. The basement door opened and light spilled down the stairs. Santos positioned herself behind a support pillar and gestured for Marcus to hide behind the boiler. 2 sets of footsteps descended into the basement. "Bobby, this is crazy," the second voice said. Marcus didn't recognize this one. "What if we're wrong? What if he's not looking for anything?" "He's looking for something, all right," Hutchins replied. Boy comes back after 25 years, starts asking questions, Spends time with that Santos woman who never knew when to leave well enough alone. He's definitely looking for something. They moved through the basement, checking each room. When they reached the small tutoring room, Hutchins shone his flashlight around the space, lingering on the moved desk and open cabinet. Well, he said. Looks like someone was definitely here. Question is, did they find what they were looking for? Santos waited until both men were fully in the room, then stepped out with her weapon drawn. Millbrook Police, drop your weapons and put your hands where I can see them. Hutchins spun around, his own gun appearing in his hand with practiced ease. The second man, who Marcus now recognized as Tommy Morrison, Clayton Morrison's son, raised his hands but looked ready to run. Well, if it isn't Lieutenant Santos, Hutchins said with a cold smile. Still sticking your nose where it doesn't belong, I see. Drop the weapon, Bobby. You're trespassing on church property, and you're interfering with a police investigation. What investigation would that be? The Samuel Washington case was closed 25 years ago. Suicide, remember? I should know. I closed it myself. That's right, you did. Very quickly, as I recall. Almost like you were in a hurry to make it go away. Hutchins's smile faded. You always were too smart for your own good, Maria. Just like that damn preacher. Some people just don't know when to stop digging. Like Pastor Washington didn't know when to stop digging into the missing development funds. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Tommy Morrison looked confused, but Hutchins's face went very still. I don't know what you're talking about, he said finally. Sure you do, Bobby. We found the letter. We heard the tape. We know about the money, about the conspiracy, about what really happened to Pastor Sam. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Hutchins made his decision. Instead of dropping his weapon, he raised it toward Santos. Marcus acted without thinking. He grabbed a heavy theological textbook from the shelf and hurled it at Hutchins's gun hand. The book connected solidly, knocking the weapon aside just as it fired. The gunshot was deafening in the small space, and plaster rained down from the ceiling where the bullet had struck. Santos didn't hesitate. She tackled Hutchins while he was off balance, and they went down hard on the concrete floor. Tommy Morrison tried to run, but Marcus grabbed him before he could reach the stairs. Tommy Morrison, Santos said as she handcuffed the former sheriff. You're under arrest for trespassing, conspiracy, and interfering with a police investigation. Bobby Hutchins, you're under arrest for the same charges, plus assault with a deadly weapon on a police officer. As Santos called for backup, Marcus looked at the two men who had helped destroy Pastor Washington's life. They seemed smaller now, older, more pathetic than threatening, but they had still been willing to kill to protect their secrets. It won't matter, Hutchins said as they waited for other officers to arrive. You don't have enough. You'll never have enough. Some secrets are too big, involve too many important people. We'll see about that, Santos replied. But Marcus could see the concern in her eyes. Hutchins was right about one thing. This conspiracy went beyond just a small-town sheriff and a county development director. If Richard Hawthorne was involved, if the corruption reached the state level, then they were going up against people with serious power and resources. But as Marcus thought about Pastor Washington's letter, about the man's faith that truth would eventually prevail, he felt something he hadn't experienced in 25 years. He felt hope. The web unravels. The arrest of Bobby Hutchins made headlines in the Millbrook Gazette, though the story Santos released to the press was carefully limited. Former sheriff arrested in church break-in didn't mention Pastor Washington or suggest any connection to old cases. But in a small town, word travels fast, and by the next morning, everyone knew that something significant was happening. Marcus spent the morning at the 3 banks in town, working with Santos to check for safety deposit boxes registered to Pastor Washington. They struck out at First National and Community Trust, but at Millbrook Savings, the manager, an elderly woman named Mrs. Patterson, who remembered Pastor Washington fondly, confirmed that he had indeed rented Box 247. Such a good man, she said as she led them to the vault. I always wondered what happened to him. The suicide story never sat right with me. Pastor Sam had too much faith to take his own life. The safety deposit box contained a treasure trove of evidence. Bank statements showing suspicious transfers, copies of development contracts, photographs of meetings between officials, and most damning of all, a ledger in Pastor Washington's careful handwriting documenting payments and transactions that clearly showed how the housing development money had been diverted. This is it. Santos said, photographing each document. This is enough to bring down the whole network. But Marcus was thinking about something else. Lieutenant, look at these dates. The last entry in the ledger is February 8, 1999. Pastor Washington disappeared on February 11th. That means he was still gathering evidence right up until the end. Santos nodded grimly, which means they probably knew he was getting close. The question is, what made them decide to act when they did? The answer came from an unexpected source. As they were leaving the bank, Marcus's phone rang. It was Deshawn, and he sounded shaken. Marcus, you need to come to the church right away. We found something else. Something that changes everything. They drove to Mount Olive quickly, where Deshawn was waiting with Sister Gladys and several other church members. The group looked somber, and Marcus could see they'd been crying. What is it? He asked. Sister Gladys held up an old manila folder. We were cleaning out more of the church files, trying to organize things better after yesterday's excitement. This was in a box of old financial records. She handed him the folder. Inside were copies of checks, church checks, signed by Pastor Washington and made out to various local charities and community organizations. But several of the checks had been altered after they were written, with different amounts and different payees. Someone was embezzling from the church, Deshawn said quietly, using Pastor Sam's signature, changing the checks after he signed them. The money was going to shell companies instead of the charities. Marcus studied the altered checks more carefully. The handwriting used for the alterations was familiar. He'd seen it on documents in the safety deposit box. Clayton Morrison, he said. Morrison was stealing from the church too. That's not the worst part, Sister Gladys said. Look at this. She showed him a letter, also in the folder. It was addressed to the State Attorney General's office, dated February 10, 1999, the same date as the letter Pastor Washington had left for Marcus. The letter detailed the embezzlement from the church and connected it to the larger development fund fraud. Pastor Washington was planning to report everything, not just the county corruption, but the theft from his own church. He was going to expose it all, Marcus said. That's why they had to stop him. It wasn't just about the development money anymore. It was about covering up multiple crimes. Santos was already on her phone calling the state police. We need to coordinate with the State Attorney General's office, she told Marcus. This is bigger than anything we can handle at the local level. But as she made her calls, Marcus noticed something that made his blood run cold. Across the street from the church, the same dark sedan was parked, the one he'd seen the day before. As he watched, the driver made a phone call, his eyes never leaving the church. We're being watched, Marcus told Santos when she finished her call. She followed his gaze and swore under her breath. How long has that car been there? I've seen it twice now. I think they've been monitoring us since this whole thing started. Santos walked casually toward her police car, using the vehicle as cover while she radioed for backup. But before any other officers could arrive, the sedan pulled away quickly, disappearing around a corner. They know we found the evidence, Santos said, which means they're going to be desperate now. Desperate people do dangerous things. She was more right than she knew. That afternoon, while Marcus was at Deshawn's house reviewing all the evidence they'd gathered, Santos received a call at the police station. The voice was electronically disguised, but the message was clear. Back off the Washington case or people are going to get hurt. The reporter and his family, the preacher's cousin, even you. We know where you all live. Santos immediately called Marcus and told him about the threat. We need to get you somewhere safe, she said, and we need to move fast on this case before they have time to destroy more evidence or hurt someone. But Marcus was thinking about something else. Lieutenant, they mentioned my family. I don't have any family here except Deshawn, but I do have family in Chicago, my ex-wife, my daughter. If they're serious about these threats. He was already reaching for his phone to call Chicago when it rang. The caller ID showed his ex-wife's number. Marcus? Jennifer's voice was tight with fear. There are men outside our building. They've been there all morning, and when I tried to leave for work, one of them showed me a photo of you. He said I should tell you to be careful about the stories you choose to investigate. Marcus felt ice in his veins. Jen, listen to me very carefully. Take Emma and go to your mother's house right now. Don't pack anything, don't stop to talk to anyone, just go. I'll call the Chicago police and have them meet you there. Marcus, what's going on? What kind of story are you working on? The kind that gets people killed if they get too close to the truth. Just go, Jen, please. I'll explain everything later. After he hung up, Santos was already coordinating with state and federal authorities. The threats across state lines make this a federal case now, she said. FBI will be involved by tomorrow morning. But Marcus wasn't sure they had until tomorrow morning. The people behind this conspiracy had spent 25 years covering their tracks, and now they were desperate. Desperate enough to threaten innocent people, desperate enough to kill. The truth emerges. That evening, as Marcus and Deshawn waited under police protection at the station, Santos received word that FBI agents were en route from Montgomery. But she also received more disturbing news. Clayton Morrison had been found dead in his Florida retirement home, apparent heart attack, though no autopsy had been performed yet. They're cleaning house, Marcus said grimly, getting rid of anyone who might talk. Santos nodded, which means we need to move fast. If Morrison is dead, and if they're willing to threaten your family, then they're preparing for an endgame. The FBI agents arrived at midnight, Agent Sarah Chen from the Financial Crimes Unit and Agent Robert Hayes from Organized Crime. They listened to the evidence presentation with professional interest, but Agent Chen's expression grew increasingly serious as she reviewed the financial documents. "This is more extensive than you realize," she said finally. "We've been tracking a network of municipal corruption across 3 states. Shell companies, development fund diversions, public money being funneled into private accounts. Your pastor Washington stumbled onto what we believe is a multi-million-dollar operation." Agent Hayes spread out a series of photographs on the conference table. "Recognize any of these faces?" Marcus immediately identified Richard Hawthorne and Bobby Hutchins. But there were others, men in expensive suits. Some he recognized as business leaders and politicians he'd seen in the news over the years. "The network has grown since 1999, Hayes explained. "What started as small-town corruption has become a regional syndicate. Senator Hawthorne isn't just involved. He's been running it for the past decade, which explains why they're willing to kill to protect it," Chen added. "We're talking about careers, reputations, and millions of dollars at stake." Santos leaned forward. "What do you need from us?" "We need to move fast before they destroy more evidence or eliminate more witnesses. Tomorrow morning we execute coordinated arrests across 3 states. But tonight, we need to make sure all of you stay alive." They spent the night at a safe house outside of town, but Marcus couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Pastor Washington, about the courage it must have taken to stand up to such powerful people, knowing the personal cost. The man had given up everything: his freedom, his life, his ability to see Marcus grow up, to protect his community and preserve the truth. The next morning brought a flurry of activity. Federal agents swept through Millbrook, Montgomery, and Birmingham simultaneously, arresting dozens of people connected to the corruption network. Senator Richard Hawthorne was taken into custody at his home, while his associates were rounded up at offices and country clubs across the region. The evidence Pastor Washington had carefully preserved proved to be the keystone that brought down the entire operation. His recordings, documents, and meticulous notes provided the foundation for what federal prosecutors called one of the largest municipal corruption cases in the region's history. But the most significant moment came 3 days later, when Bobby Hutchins, facing federal charges and a potential life sentence, finally agreed to talk. The final truth. The interview room at the federal building in Montgomery was stark and impersonal, but the truth that emerged there was anything but cold. Bobby Hutchins, looking older and more defeated than Marcus remembered, sat across from Agent Chen, Santos, and Marcus, ready to confess everything. "Pastor Washington called me on February 10th, Hutchins began, his voice barely above a whisper. "Said he had evidence of corruption and wanted to meet. He was going to turn everything over to the state attorney general the next morning." "So you killed him?" Agent Chen asked directly. Hutchins shook his head. No, we didn't kill him. That's what I've been trying to tell you. We planned to. God help me, we actually planned to. But we didn't." Marcus leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "We arranged to meet him at Miller's Pond that night. The plan was to make it look like suicide. Hawthorne had it all worked out. But when we got there, Pastor Washington wasn't there. His car was, keys in the ignition, but he was gone." Santos frowned. "Gone how?" "We searched everywhere. Flashlights, boats on the pond, everything. He had just vanished, like he knew we were coming." "What about the note?" Marcus asked. "We found it in the car, but it wasn't a suicide note. Not really. It said he couldn't bear the weight of what he knew, that God would forgive him. We figured he meant he was going to run, disappear before we could stop him. Hawthorne decided to let people think it was suicide. It solved our problem either way. Agent Chen studied Hutchins carefully. You're saying Pastor Washington is still alive? I don't know. Maybe. We never found a body. Never found any trace of him after that night. For 25 years, I've wondered if he's out there somewhere, waiting for the right moment to come back. The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. Pastor Washington might be alive. Somewhere, somehow, the man who had been like a father to him might have survived, might have spent 25 years in hiding, waiting for justice to catch up with his enemies. But Agent Chen had a different question. If you didn't kill him, how do you explain Clayton Morrison's death in Florida last week? Hutchins looked genuinely confused. Clay's dead? I didn't know that. Heart attack? That's what it looked like. But given the timing, that wasn't us, Hutchins said firmly. If Clay died, it wasn't because of anything we did. Hell, we needed him alive. He was the only one who knew where all the money went. Over the next several hours, Hutchins provided a complete confession about the corruption network, the stolen funds, and the cover-up that had lasted 25 years. But the question of what had actually happened to Pastor Washington remained unanswered. That afternoon, Marcus stood in the cemetery behind Mount Olive Baptist Church, staring at the memorial marker that bore Pastor Washington's name. Was it possible? Could the man actually be alive somewhere? Marcus? The voice behind him was soft, familiar. He turned to see Sister Gladys approaching, carrying a bouquet of fresh flowers. Sister Gladys, I was just thinking. About Pastor Sam? About whether he might still be out there somewhere? Marcus nodded. It seems impossible, but nothing's impossible with God, child. I always felt in my heart that Pastor Sam wasn't really gone. Not dead anyway, just waiting. Waiting for what? For the truth to come out, for justice to be done, for someone he trusted to be ready to carry on his work. She placed the flowers on the memorial marker. Someone like you. As they stood there in the afternoon sunlight, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in 25 years. A sense of peace, of purpose, of connection to something larger than himself. Whether Pastor Washington was alive or dead, his work was finally complete. The truth had emerged, justice was being served, and the community he had loved was finally free from the corruption that had poisoned it. Redemption. 6 months later, Marcus sat in the same pew where he'd attended services as a child, listening to Deshawn deliver a sermon about justice, truth, and redemption. The corruption trials were ongoing, with Senator Hawthorne and his associates facing decades in prison. The stolen development funds were being recovered and would finally be used to build the affordable housing Pastor Washington had fought for. But the most significant change was in Marcus himself. The cynicism that had defined his adult life was gone, replaced by something he'd thought he'd lost forever. Faith. Not necessarily in organized religion, though he'd started attending services again, but in the fundamental goodness of people, in the power of truth to overcome lies, and in the possibility that justice could prevail even when it seemed impossible. His relationship with his ex-wife and daughter had improved too. The shared danger had reminded them all of what really mattered, and Jennifer had agreed to let Emma spend the summer in Alabama, where Marcus was writing a book about Pastor Washington's story. After the service, as the congregation filed out into the summer sunshine, Sister Gladys approached him with a knowing smile. You look different, child, she said. More like the boy I remember, the one who believed in things. I'm trying to get back to that person, Marcus admitted. It's not easy, unlearning 25 years of cynicism. The best things never are easy, but Pastor Sam would be proud of you, wherever he is. As if summoned by her words, a figure appeared at the edge of the cemetery. An elderly black man with gray hair and a walking stick, watching the church from a distance. Marcus felt his heart stop. Sister Gladys, he whispered. Look. She followed his gaze and gasped. Oh, my Lord. Oh, my sweet Lord. The man seemed to sense their attention. For a moment he stood perfectly still, as if deciding something. Then, slowly, he began walking toward them. Marcus knew that walk, even after 25 years. He knew the careful way the man held himself, the dignified bearing that had commanded respect from everyone who knew him. As the figure drew closer, Marcus could see the familiar eyes, older now but still kind, still full of the wisdom and compassion he remembered. Pastor Samuel Washington was alive. Full circle. The reunion was overwhelming. Pastor Washington, who had been living under an assumed name in a small town in Mississippi, working as a church janitor and occasional substitute preacher, embraced Marcus with tears streaming down his face. "My son," he whispered. "My dear son, you did it. You found the truth. Pastor Sam, everyone thought you were dead. I had to let them think that. It was the only way to protect all of you. But I've been watching, waiting, praying that someday the truth would come out." Over the next several hours, Pastor Washington told his story. On the night of February 10th, 1999, he had indeed gone to Miller's Pond to meet with the conspirators, but he had arrived early and overheard them planning his murder. Instead of confronting them, he had made the hardest decision of his life, to disappear completely. "I left the car and the note to make them think their plan had worked," he explained. "Then I walked through the woods to where a friend was waiting, someone who helped me start a new life. I've spent 25 years in exile, but I never stopped believing that God would bring justice in his own time." The truth was finally complete. Senator Hawthorne and his network received lengthy prison sentences. The stolen funds were recovered and used to build the community center and affordable housing Pastor Washington had originally envisioned. Bobby Hutchins, in exchange for his testimony, received a reduced sentence, but would spend his remaining years knowing the weight of his crimes. Epilogue: The light returns. 1 year later, Marcus stood at the pulpit of Mount Olive Baptist Church, not as a preacher, but as a witness to truth. The sanctuary was packed for the dedication of the Samuel Washington Community Justice Center, funded by the recovered stolen money and donations from across the country who had heard the story. Pastor Washington, now in his 70s but still strong, sat in the front pew beside Sister Gladys, Deshawn, and Lieutenant Santos, who had been promoted to Chief of Police. Marcus's daughter Emma sat with them, visiting for the summer and fascinated by the story of courage and redemption that had transformed her father. 25 years ago, Marcus began, "I lost my faith in this place. I believed that goodness could be destroyed, that truth could be buried forever, that justice was just a word we used to comfort ourselves. But I learned something in these past months. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness cannot overcome it." He looked at Pastor Washington, who nodded with the same gentle smile Marcus remembered from childhood. "Truth has a way of surfacing no matter how deep we bury it. Love has a way of enduring even when we try to kill it. And faith, real faith, has a way of returning when we need it most, often through the most unexpected messengers." As Marcus finished speaking, the congregation rose in spontaneous applause. But more than that, there was a sense of healing in the room, of wounds finally closed, of justice finally served, and of a community made whole again. Outside, the Alabama sun shone bright on the new community center where children would learn, families would gather, and the legacy of a good man's sacrifice would live on. The truth had indeed set them free, and in that freedom, they had found their way back to hope. The story of Pastor Samuel Washington was complete, but the story of the community he had saved was just beginning. And in that beginning, Marcus Thompson had found not just the truth he'd been seeking, but the faith he thought he'd lost forever. The end